Hey everybody, we're almost towards the end of the class, and I wanted to do a short video lecture or just recap on the two classes we had on women's health, one on reproductive health, labor and delivery, abortion, childlessness, and then the second one on breast cancer. And some of the comments I want to share come from your great SAC papers, which um, I say this many times, but I'd say one of the best parts of the class for me, and reading them all every time helps me the next time I do this class, sort of informs me on how this is being processed, and you guys provide insights which are really valuable. Thank you. So I'll turn off my video and just some things. The first article that was on the class on women's health by Caitlin Flanagan, called "The Things We Can't Face," is one of the few assignments I ever make or ever provide on abortion. And based on some of your feedback in your papers, I think I don't know, I might consider doing a whole class on abortion, although I think I used to many years ago, and it was just so divisive and intense and emotional. And I think if I can remember correctly, I started steering away from it. And in fact, in many years, I have no readings or assignments on abortion. But your all's papers reminded me that this is really still an important issue. Even though we don't talk about it, I think the statistic I remember reading in an Atul Gawande article was that 1 in 4 women in their lifetime will have an abortion. And that number is absolutely, something tells me that's not true. Like, it can't be that high. But then if you look at the actual statistics, we don't have as many abortions as we used to. It's come down considerably in the last 2 decades, which is good because it's so fraught with um, politics and religion and philosophy, and it's very divisive, and it's so the less of that, the better. But as this article, I think, does a really good job, be careful if you're anti-abortion and quote pro-life, as many Americans are. It's been a long time. It's been since 1973, 1974, since it's been illegal. So for many people, they forget what life was like before it was legal to have a first trimester abortion. And this article is a really important, valuable reminder of just how dangerous and how scary it was back when women had to, if they were desperate, and many women were every year, upwards of 750,000, give or take, sometimes up towards 1 million women have gotten abortions since Roe v. Wade per year, and that number's come down. But as the article stated, it's hard to get estimates, but between 200,000 and 700,000 women got abortions before Roe v. Wade. So they had it done back alley. Lysol. I used to have Lysol. I used to use it in the house. It's a very powerful cleanser. I can't even look at it. I can't think about it after this article, because it was subtly suggested to women as a way as birth control. And her article, Caitlin Flanagan, by the way, whose background I believe, you guys can look this up. She's a conservative writer. Caitlin Flanagan her history has been to write from a more conservative, traditional, sort of pro-religion position, very thoughtfully, very analytically. So she sort of concludes this article, as you know, saying at the end of the day, it's a gut-wrenching decision to which side you'll be on. And for her, even though her instincts are sort of anti-abortion, pro-life, doing the research on these, reading the medical reports of women who died from botched abortions and women who almost died from botched abortions, and Lysol. Look at these advertisements. Too late to cry out in anguish. Beware of the one intimate neglect that can engulf you in marital grief, doubt, inhibitions, ignorance, misgivings. And the thinking was, if you're just not careful, you could have an unwanted child, right? She was a jewel of a wife with just one flaw. My God, what is that one flaw? She was guilty of the one neglect that mars many marriages. Lysol helps avoid this. Feminine hygiene. And that the husband wasn't interested in the wife unless she used Lysol. Oh my God, you can't believe these advertisements were real until you actually look them up and say, yep, they were real. And the one she uses in her article, I just can't face it again, Lysol. So here's a calendar, right? There's a reference to physicians. The woman is overwhelmed. Lysol disinfected. Now, if you're like me and you've grown up, you think Lysol is just a house cleanser. It was subtly encouraged, suggested to women to use to avoid unwanted pregnancies. And so I think nobody in their right mind ever wants to go back to the pre-1973 era when Lysol and things like this were what women had to turn to. So that's how she starts off the article. And then she pivots in the latter part of the article to this amazing technology that we now have that can see babies in the womb, and you can see the intimate detail of their physiology, of their humanity. And that's what sets up this article that's saying we need to have people be honest about both of this. Like, nobody wants to go back to this. That's horrific. And nobody wants to go back to these medical articles by physicians saying, oh my gosh, there's a rash of women who are dying or near dying from botched abortions. Right? Nobody wants to go back to that. So hold that up there. You have to hold two things simultaneously. Nobody wants that. That's horrible, horrible, horrible. Just keep saying it. It's horrible. At the same time, that's real too. Like, you can see why abortion, you can see actually why I just sort of steer away from it in classes, because it's like, I can't think of too many issues. Race is another one, but we have to talk about race because our country has just never come to grips with that, and never atoned for it, and never admitted the disparities, the unfairnesses, the trauma of race that goes back 400 years. So we need to have that reckoning. Actually, it's interesting. The moment we're having in our country on race, it's the reason we're having it and keep having it is because we've never come to terms with it and actually cleaned it up and addressed it and been honest about it. We've never been honest about race. We just keep pushing it aside. Oh yeah, some police reforms. Oh yeah, a little bit of affirmative action. Oh yeah, let's have a theoretical talk about reparations, and then let's move on to something else. If you don't have a real reckoning and reconciliation, atonement, acknowledgement of the truth, then you have what you have in race in our country, is that it's not addressed and it's not healed. And abortion, her article, Caitlin Flanagan, is saying the same thing. Like, you've got to come to grips with this reality and that reality, right? And that's the argument for abortion. If made honestly, requires many words. It must evoke the recent past, the dire consequences to women of making a very simple medical procedure illegal. Really? We're going to make abortion illegal, then we're going to go back to some stuff that you haven't seen in a while and people don't want to talk about, but it was real and it was horrible and people died. People's daughters died, people's wives died, people's girlfriends died, people's sisters died. So you got to be honest about that. Okay? The argument against it doesn't take even a single word. The argument against it is the picture. So the argument against abortion is that. The argument for making abortion legal or keeping it legal is this, right? This is not an argument anyone is going to win. The loudest advocates on both sides are terrible representatives for their cause. When women are urged to shout your abortion, and when abortion becomes the subject of stand-up comedy routines, the attitude toward abortion seems ghoulish. Who could possibly be proud that they see no humanity at all in the images that science has made so painfully clear? When anti-abortion advocates speak in the most graphic terms about women sucking babies out of the womb, they show themselves without mercy. They are not considering the extremely human, complex, and often heartbreaking reasons behind women's private decisions. The truth is that the best argument on each side is a damn good argument. And until you acknowledge that fact, you aren't speaking or even thinking honestly about the issue. You certainly aren't going to convince anybody. Only the truth has the power to move. And you guys can read the rest of this conclusion again. So this is, I don't know. I might make this I don't know. You might make another class on this in the future. Although I go through this and I think, oh God, I don't know. We did this online. You guys gave me your SAC papers. Doing it in class, in person next to person, might be a different experience. Now, that takes us to Christine Ryder and her TED Talk on I Don't Want Children, Stop Telling Me I'll Change My Mind. And again, some of your SAC papers I really enjoyed reading because some of you were like, whoa, that's never thought of that before. Some of you are like, yep, I totally respect that, and I'm looking forward to having 4 children, which is the majority, I would say, at this point, of women, although definitely not all women. And then a few of you wrote, like, thank you for assigning this because I've thought this all my life, and I've never been comfortable talking about it or articulating it. And it turns out more women aren't having children. It's interesting now. Millennials are not having children at the rate that Gen X or baby boomers had children. So the reasons for that are expenses, costs, delaying for education reasons, professional reasons, and increasingly for environmental reasons. Now, what's really interesting is that this is not a linear phenomenon. It turns out there's kind of a curve. Let me show you this. So 1994, the percent of women ages 40 to 44 who are childless is higher than it was now. So it's interesting. I assign this and that women are having less children, but the trend of having no children has actually curved back a little bit. See the rise and fall of childlessness. So that kind of peaked back in the mid 2000s, and it hasn't just kept continuing. Now, maybe again, maybe Gen Z will, their generation, after all that we're going through in this pandemic, maybe this will click back up, sort of click back up again. But it goes up and down. And I look for hypotheses for why that is. You would think, oh, it's just a linear or flat line. Nope. I don't know. Having said that, the number of children, the fertility rate, the birth per 1,000 women is continued to go down and down. Again, the reasons being financial, educational, professional, environmental, bioethical. Look at this. Look at this graph for a second. Most parents under 50 and many childless adults don't expect to have kids in the future, right? This is back in 2018. So these are people who already have kids. Are they going to have more kids? No, right? And then those who aren't parents yet, ages 18 to 49, 61% are going to have it. They plan. They think they're going to have a child. But look at this graph over here, or this number over here. Among those who are not parents now, ages 18 to 49, 37% not likely to have more kids, not planning, not in the cards. And this is not just in the United States. It's actually more pronounced in Germany, Spain, United States. Like we're kind of trying to figure this out. We were kind of childless women are going down and going up and going down. So the United States is still figuring this out. It's kind of an interesting trend in general. So I don't know what it is. And then millennials saying that they're not as interested in some of the traditional markers of adulthood of house, marriage, kids. Partly that is a function of student debt. So many students have debt that they want to pay off first, which is a separate issue, but it's very related to all of this. I say a separate issue because it's a separate, if you guys know me, I have a very strong feeling about the rising levels of student debt that higher education is hoisting on young adults. And I have tremendous guilt about that because I work in this industry. Right? I'm a professor, so guilt by association that I'm part of the problem. I'm just, wherever I can, I try to push for ways to address this in my very small, minuscule, non-significant way as just one professor. But it's totally logical that as more and more students have more and more debt, then all of the big things like houses, cars, marriage, family, kids can be pushed off significantly until that debt is down or eliminated. Just if you want to go check this out, there's a website called the Not Mom by Choice or by Chance that sort of is like a support group for people who are childless because they can have children, like they can't, or choosing not to. And it's just like they're sharing stories and resources and just perspectives. It's still, the majority of women will have children, and I can tell you, when my wife and I got married in 20 years ago, I don't think we ever thought it was a choice. The defaults about what was expected and what was the norm were so powerful, they didn't have to be articulated by anyone. We just assumed them. So this is a more recent phenomenon of saying, maybe not.
85 ans, t'as pas encore d'enfant? Ah, faut que tu te dépêches,
Cuando somos niñas, el primer juguete que nos regalan es el de las muñecas. A los 20 años, y diría yo ahora tal vez a los 25, la pregunta es no tanto si vas a tener hijos, sino que cuándo los vas a tener.
Et donc, il y a comment dirais-je, tout un réseau de pression sur les femmes pour qu'elles ne ratent pas leur vie et qu'elles restent sans enfants.
Our entire lives, we have been conditioned to expect to become mothers. There's a lot of shame attached to childlessness.
Et il y a toujours l'idée qu'une femme sans enfant, c'est pas tout à fait une femme, c'est pas une vraie femme.
There's something fundamentally wrong with you as a woman that you don't have children. And there is a sense of otherness, of not quite being a woman. It really has its roots in patriarchy.
Estamos arrastrando un código ideal que realmente es un constructo de hace 2 siglos. No sucede nada si un hombre no es padre. No se le va a juzgar, ¿no?, su plenitud de identidad masculina. Sin embargo, a las mujeres sí.
Les que han decidit no tindre se les associa a dones que rebutgen la feminitat, que es volen identificar amb homes, que poden ser més masculines que femenines. Això són estereotips. M'explico?
They only use the negative side of these stereotypes to shame us. Why is society so scared of us? That it needs to make us so small and feel so ashamed.
El que passa és que la societat no està habituada ni preparada per escoltar que una dona no vulgui tenir fills.
Everybody loves a baby. Sometimes a new baby arriving can be pretty hard.
El punto de mira siempre están las mujeres, incluso siendo madres porque deciden dar pecho o deciden no darle pecho, porque deciden incorporarse antes al mercado laboral o porque deciden quedarse en casa cuidando a la criatura.
It's becoming very difficult to shame this many women into silence because we're finding each other. And we're finding actually that the other women aren't these weeping weirdos, which is what childless women often think other childless women are going to be like that. But actually, we're a really diverse bunch of interesting women.
Que deixin en pau a les dones perquè puguin escollir el que els hi vagi bé.
Okay. Excuse me. Just fascinating. Again, I think it's only in the last generation, in the last 20 years, that this is something that is more widely discussed, more widely accepted. And it just shows you for just how long, centuries and centuries and centuries, being a 20, 30-year-old woman, it was just assumed that you either had a child or were going to have them very soon. And then if it wasn't, it just always triggered questions like, what up? What's going on? Is it something amiss? So just interesting how that's never done, of course, for men. If men don't have children, don't want children, or it's just not as big an issue. Now, okay, so you go from that and that TED Talk and this discussion and those trends up and down to labor and delivery and the documentary 40 Weeks. And I could say so many things about the documentary 40 Weeks. I'll list a few, and I really enjoyed reading your all's reactions to this documentary. Number one, I like to include material like this because it gets away from all the spin and the glamorizing and almost advertising, and it shows what the truth is, which is good and bad. You watch this, these people are super excited, super elated. There is so much enthusiasm, and there's a lot of joy. So that's all captured in this, and it should be, because that's truth. That's the reality. It's awesome. What's also captured in this is the fear, the anxiety, the physiological consequences that, of course, just women face, and the guys are sort of on the periphery, sort of helping in some instances, but not ever really able to do substantial help because they can never handle this. And it shows all the different ways this can play out for people. I just think it's, you guys can ask your friends. My own takeaway sort of hunch is that if men never had to go through this for us to continue the species, we do it, but I think there'd be a lot less childbirth in general. I think, it's mentioned in this documentary. One woman's like, men don't have periods. They don't have to go through childbirth. They don't have to go through menopause. I mean, those things would have a profound impact on everything in life that currently exists, all the policies, all the culture, all the assumptions, all the norms and mores that we have now are partly, if not primarily, a function that all of these major things are carried by one sex, women, and not men. And if men went through this, there would be profound changes in maternity leave, paternity leave, contraception, flexibility of work arrangements, number of children, social norms, equal pay. It would have profound impacts. And I think it's just fun to watch documentaries that are so educational about something that it's going to happen to the majority of people. I look at my classes and I see, my gosh, the majority of the people in this class are going to experience this labor and delivery and pregnancy and all of that. And it's not necessarily covered in classes. It's not necessarily part of any curriculum. And so how do people figure out about this? Well, I guess the hard way, by others, by good documentaries. So now the last part of this is breast cancer, and using the example of breast cancer to highlight the gray area of medicine and the intensely emotional aspects of medical care and uncertainty and paternalism in medicine. When I say paternalism in medicine, until about 2 generations ago, the reigning paradigm in medicine was doctor told you what to do, patient did it. You might, if you were really, really independent, might get a second opinion. But 99 times out of 100, doctor tells you, the patient, to do X, you do X. And, over time, people became dissatisfied with that paternalistic model of patient being so subservient. And there was a growing call for patient autonomy and patient-centered care, and letting patients decide with the consultation of their physicians, which in many ways seems obviously better. At the same time, the reality so often is the patient and their loved ones are sitting there going, we don't know. Like, we don't know what to do. We're paralyzed with fear, and we're actually hopeful that the doctor will just make the decision and make quote unquote the right one about doing mammograms every year, every other year, starting at 40, starting at 50, doing a lumpectomy, doing a mastectomy, doing a prophylactic mastectomy, meaning prophylactic, meaning taking your breasts off even though there's no sign of cancer because you have a history of it in your family or you have a fear of it. And so a lot of times patients now, and this is not just in breast cancer, but breast cancer is one of the best examples of this dilemma, is that we have this mentality of patient-centered care, patient autonomy, the customer is king. But once you actually find yourself in one of these situations, some people are like, oh my God, I don't want to make this decision. Making the decision itself is a burden because I don't know what to do. And then, of course, you read Peggy Orenstein's Our Feel Good War on Breast Cancer, and her personal experience with something that we call cancer, but it actually technically isn't cancer. It's stage 0. And when she was first told she had a stage 0 breast cancer, she freaked out because they didn't say stage 0. She had to find out that it actually really isn't technically cancer. It is stage 0, but it could one day turn into cancer, but it's just not likely to. And her whole like, oh my gosh, we have all these quote unquote breast cancer survivors in this country because that's part of the marketing, but they never would have been threatened in the first place. So they're only survivors because we call them survivors, but they were actually false positives and had to go through all these biopsies and chemo and radiation and surgery with all the collateral damage that's associated with that. And the likelihood is they didn't need it. Now I say the likelihood. The reality is most of these abnormalities won't be lethal, but a small subset will. And so we treat every abnormality as it could be in that small subset that is lethal, because about 40,000 women die of breast cancer every year, which is less than it used to be, thanks in part to better treatment. But just the fear that your abnormality could be one of those minority of cases where it metastasizes and becomes lethal means we've been very, very aggressive at treating all abnormalities in women's breast cancer. And then her argument also is, you leave it to Americans to make money off of cancer, and breast cancer in particular. I've actually done 10K Komen 5K races, and I have pink stuff around the house. Breast cancer in your breast doesn't kill you. The disease becomes deadly when it metastasizes, as I said earlier, spreading to other organs of the bones. Early detection is based on the theory, dating back to the late 19th century, that the disease progresses consistently, beginning with a single rogue cell, growing sequentially, and at some invariable point making a lethal leap. Curing it then was assumed to be a matter of finding and cutting out a tumor before that metastasis happens. I'm telling you, if you show this to everybody in America or a huge population, they'd say, yep, that sounds absolutely right. All right. But the idea that that could be one solution to breast cancer, screening, early detection, some universal cure, is certainly appealing. All of us, those who fear the disease, those who live with it, our friends and families, the corporations who swathe themselves in pink, wish it were true. Wearing a bracelet, sporting a ribbon, running a race, or buying a pink blender expresses our hopes, and that feels good, even virtuous, but making a difference is more complicated than that. It has now been 4 decades since the former First Lady Betty Ford, President Gerald Ford's wife, went public with her breast cancer diagnosis, shattering the stigma of the disease. She also wrestled with alcoholism and started the Betty Ford Clinic. Betty Ford was way ahead of her time. It has been 3 decades since the founding of Komen, 2 decades since the introduction of the pink ribbon, yet all that well-meaning awareness has ultimately made women less conscious of the facts, more aware of breast cancer, but less conscious of the facts, obscuring the limits of screening, conflating risk with disease, compromising our decisions about healthcare, celebrating cancer survivors who may have never had anything required treating. And ultimately, it has come at the expense of those whose lives are most at risk. And her argument is, let's spend less of that time and effort and money and on awareness and more on treatment and access. And then you read that my brief trip to Cancerland. Maybe doctors will be treating early signs of cancer differently in 10 years, or not even calling them cancers at all. Maybe I'd never go in for that initial mammogram, or maybe nothing's going to change and I did exactly the right thing. I'll never know. She had the same thing, which leaves me with those maddening magic 8-ball answers that nobody wants. But should I get a mammogram? Should I have a biopsy? Should I get a lumpectomy? Should I do something in advance? Reply hazy, ask again later. Better not to tell that you know. And then, by the way, this is what's really interesting. Caitlin Flanagan just wrote an essay in the Atlantic Monthly about a month ago. She is battling stage 4 breast cancer. It's a recurrence. She's had it before and got treated and was in remission. And here she is in the middle of the pandemic. You can look it up. And I include a quote from her article about this because I always in this course am trying to bring us back to how does this actually play out in our real lived lives when you experience any of these things, empathy and denial and illness and recovery. How does it actually feel to be a patient, to be a caregiver for the patient, to be a clinician, to be a caregiver? She writes, the day my husband and I drove to the appointment where Dr. Hurvitz would tell us the results of the scan was an experience of anxiety and fear I can't convey. The fear you feel when you're waiting to hear the results of a cancer scan is different from when you're in physical danger. You have the same adrenaline overload, but you can't go into fight or flight. You can't even freeze. You have to keep putting one foot after the other into the clinic, out of the parking lot, into the room, out of the parking garage, into the lobby, into the elevator. You have to have a nurse check your vitals, and you have to sit on the table with the white paper and wait. I'm telling you, you think you're ready for this in life, but you're not. You're never ready. You're never ready for this.
I just didn't realize what a loss it would be. By definition, cancer is out. It's unregulated. So we have studies going way back to the 70s. And mastectomy doesn't save your life.
We know that these diseases are, we're not good enough yet as a pathological community. And a lot of this has become the price to pay for screening.
So this woman here thinks she lived 5 years long, but she doesn't.
Breast is very subjective. And one woman can lose it and not think much more about it. And another woman, it's devastating.
And it might be said that this woman here has 5 more years of anguish than this woman does now.
Go get you your mom and they'll look better. I'm not angry that I have breast cancer, but I'm angry that the other things are lazy.
I'm fighting for my life.
Can I give you a hug?
No. I wear a big sign that says, don't hug the surgeon.
Ralph's man is very different than mine. I'm worth all that passion at all. I only want to talk about science and medicine.
The intense emotions of fear, anxiety, regret play into this phenomenon of a growing number of women with breast cancer who are choosing double mastectomy. So they have a cancerous tumor in one breast, and they're having both breasts removed because it gives them peace of mind. And it came out in a lot of your papers. How do you put a value, monetary or otherwise, on peace of mind? Well, it's hard, but I can tell you what, if you don't have it, you'd be willing to pay a lot for it because you sort of take it for granted until you lose it, until you don't have peace of mind. And for many women, just the idea that if you've had it once, it could come back, it could spread. And so what feels like the safest thing is just to have both breasts removed prophylactically. That's a term for preventively. And a lot of doctors are saying, oh my gosh, that's why I had the discussion prompt be, how would you try to talk to patients? If you were a surgeon, how would you try to be a good, empathetic doctor if you had a growing number of your patients saying, I want a double mastectomy, and in some cases, they don't have any evidence of breast cancer, but maybe they have a lot in their family, right? They do a genetic test, a 23andMe test, and they look at their family history. They have a lot of women and grandparents and aunts and so forth who've had breast cancer, and they say, I don't want to ever deal with that, you know? And so you think, as a doctor, how am I going to navigate this patient autonomy, right? Because the old days under paternalism, doctors say, no, it's not going to do anything for you. And a mastectomy is it's a surgery. I mean, there's risks associated with surgery. Anytime you have a surgical procedure, there's risks associated with that. And so if you're a clinician trying to honor your patient's autonomy and wishes, but you're looking at the data, but you're looking at your patient saying, well, the mental anguish and the lack of peace of mind, this class on women's health is just a reminder that we think medicine is black and white, do or don't do something. Something's good for you or it's not. It's wise or unwise. It's healthy. It's not. So much of medicine, so much is in this gray area. We don't know, right? And that was also exemplified by this Alexandra Glorioso, going from being a healthcare writer to being a patient, and the huge gulf in between. You think you're ready, you've got support networks, you've got people in your family, but you have to all of a sudden make all these decisions. Like, are you going to be in a clinical trial or not? And if you go into a clinical trial, could you be in the control group or the group that gets the treatment? You do want to advance science, but at that moment, what you really want is whatever works best for you. It's just a fascinating reminder again about, like, it goes back to that way back, the very first class we had about the woman who was a cancer survivor, but then also went into oncology. And her argument was, we treat people as either you're the patient or you're the caregiver. Like, you're either sick or you're healthy. And the reality is, all of us, if you could bend the time-space continuum, all of us are on that spectrum at one point or another, and you move. So you go from being the one giving care and you're a healthy one to the sick person, and then you become the sick person, when in reality, at some point in time, again, if you can bend the time-space continuum, we all become patients. Right? And I want to close. I think most of you picked up on why I signed this. This claymation of a young woman who has to explain her update with her mom over the phone. And I included this because this documentary, this claymation explanation of what it's like to be a patient, reminds us that what happens to so many people every day, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, is they come home, they call the person that everybody has that person or two. Usually it's a parent. Hopefully it can also be your spouse if you have one, or your best friend. Try to figure out who would that person be if all of a sudden you got a diagnosis today that was terrible. Who's the first person you call? Because there is that person. And then what you don't realize is that in medicine, that person joins you in the emotions and the experience of being a sick person, a person who needs care, a person who is scared, a person who's traumatized, a person whose whole life has been upended. It's not just that patient, it's their family, it's their loved ones. Take the journey with them. And she starts off by saying, we were switching medications because the first one was working but not working enough. We're going to try this new one. And then if you read the article carefully, the patient has stage 4 cancer, which means it's started off as breast cancer, but it's metastasized. And most often, you can Google this, stage 4, there really isn't a stage 5. Stage 4 is not likely to survive. And so we use all this language, like that first set of readings we had for this class about the grace of denial. You almost need some level of denial to keep going through another treatment regimen. You have to hope, or as we do the class on death, you come to the realization that there is literally no way you are going to survive. Then you want to go in a different direction of maximizing the quality of the life that you have left. At any rate, it's just by the way, that's them. That's the mom. That's Danny. So puts a human face on it. Take care. Hug those you love. I know it sounds kind of corny, but I tell you, this class and these assignments, they remind me every day. Every time I read them again and watch them, I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it sounds so corny. It's almost impossible to get out. But you remember we did the class on psychedelics, and Michael Pollan said, well, guess what? I took a mushroom. I went on a trip, a hallucinogenic trip. And guess what? Love is the answer to life. Love is everything. He's like, I know it sounds corny, but that's what I discovered. It's true. That's why it's on these cards. These assignments remind us that every day, even if it's a crappy day, it's a bad day, every day is a gift, especially if you're not in the hospital, not receiving treatment, if you're out taking a walk in the woods, if you're taking a nap, if you're doing all of your SAC papers for this class. Sometimes you're like, oh my God, I can't write another SAC paper. SAC papers are blessings in their own way. Take care, stay safe. See you tomorrow.
You have stopped screen share.